Hello.
You're dying.
I know.
Please don't die on our podcast. I don't want to be responsible for Pat Stewart's death. I suppose half our job as dog trainers is conveying a message to the person we're working with.
That's the key skill set, and it's what I think so many dog trainers kind of lack. If you go, I want to whack some tools on and hurt some dogs, like you're a dick. I can remember vividly the first time I ever saw a prong collar. I remember, the prong collar is the thing that they need or that the dog is going to need to be successful. And you do that kind of presentation where you hold it behind your back and you like sneakily show it to them for a second so as not to overwhelm them. Like you bring in all your desensitization, counter conditioning techniques to show them the prong collar. I think the issue with tools and the use of them is that there is still some pretty shitty use of them for sure. And I think too many options or a lack of clarity is the source of anxiety.
People don't understand that stress and pressure has accumulated over that time. And just because it's not
there's some magic that comes in overcoming the anxiety of like, I don't want to do it, but I'm going to give into this pressure and do it. And what I end up finding with those sorts of dogs is when you're upset and the dog just puts its head in your lap and you just be together, that can be an incredible thing that helps people. But when a dog's got an issue, that doesn't work for the dog, right? So
this week on Caffeine and Canines, I am joined by none other than the man himself, Mr. Pat Stewart. No, not that man off Star Trek. But if you know me, you'll know I'm a massive fan of Pat Stewart, and he's been massively influential on my career as a dog trainer and probably been the guest I have most wanted on my podcast since we started it a few years back. So this was an enlightening conversation about methods, about e-collars, about negative reinforcement, and just kind of some misconceptions in the dog training sphere. Just as always, I loved this episode and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Pat Stewart.
Pat Stewart.
Hello.
You're dying.
I know.
Please don't die on our podcast. I don't want to be responsible for Pat Stewart's death.
Mate, my kids, or my youngest just started daycare. So this is me for the next 18 months, intermittently sick with the daycare snotty nose. But that's my life.
That's okay. Let's talk about serious dog business. How's that going?
Mate, it's great. I took over this place nearly a year ago. It's like my dream content studio for training dogs. So, I mean, when we were in lockdown during COVID, this was it was a CrossFit gym, and it was friends of mine that owned it, and they obviously couldn't open. And so I was training dogs in here. And it's just some magic in this building. I love being in here. And then when I decided, okay, I need to get a place because I wanted to make this new course and I needed a place to film it. By luck, they were leaving. They kind of outgrew the space. And so it was available and ridiculously expensive, but the location's incredible. Like where it looks, it's just a warehouse facility, but I'm on the like back streets of the inner west of Sydney. So I'm like right in the city. And this building actually was the horse stables of the pub that's on the corner there. So it's probably a 150-year-old building. Yeah. And so I've been in here nearly 12 months. It took me a long time I sort of maybe jumped the gun a bit premature. I hadn't figured out this course and how it was actually going to go yet. So that took me a long time of having a space with not doing anything in it. But it's all humming along now, and I'm, part of it's been released, and the rest is all in production, and I'm re-signing another lease to stay here. So serious dog business is going good. There's a time limit on this place though, so this whole block has been zoned for redevelopment, which is how I could afford this place. So within 2 years, it might be 1, but within 2, I'll be out of here. They're going to knock this whole thing down, unfortunately. But I'm loving it right now.
What's a day-to-day look like at serious dog business? What sort of stuff are you doing there?
Mate, so like it's pretty varied. So we have the day kind of broken up into the week broken up into different days. So Mondays is a client day. That's people come in, they train with me, or I'm doing Zoom calls or whatever. So there's people in here training, and then we train. My club trains here Monday night. So it's a long day. I'm usually here from about 7 a.m. till about midnight. Then Tuesdays is I do other admin stuff. Wednesday is a content production day. We make stuff for the course. Thursday is another training day. So I'm in here normally training, once we finish up, I've got people coming in to train with me. And then Fridays is me and Jazz make these videos that we're doing for the puppies that we're raising. So, there's constant churn of dogs on the go all the time. We've got allocated spaces to make the content that we're making. And the goal throughout, the whole point of this space and the course and everything I'm putting together is I'm trying to create something of a library of, really high quality dog training information, and have that at an affordable price to people. So not to do my big pitch too early, but we've released
You
already.
can do it, blow your load, mate.
We've released already the first section of the course, which is called the Wave Toops, and it's when people would attend a seminar with me, it's the first day of that seminar, and so it's all the like dog training information you'd ever need to know to train a dog to do cool stuff. It's not for like people who would be yours and mine's client, like then it's not for pet dog owners. It's too advanced for them. It's for people who want to do cool stuff with their dog. So it is a lot of pet dog owners that buy it, but it's because they want to achieve something awesome with their dog, not because they're just looking for the basics or stuff like that. So, and it's going to just get, as I, build more of it, it's going to get more and more specific and specialized. So the next part will be, really competition sort of based. And then there's a decoy one, and it's just going to get more and more specific as the more and more pieces that I go, but it's going great. It's plodding along. I'm behind schedule, but that's life. It wouldn't be me if I wasn't overloading myself and panicked about being able to get work done at a deadline that I set for myself. So that's life.
Yeah, nice. Work through pressure, right? Can I have a snippet of what's in the Wave Toops?
Yeah, mate. It's what it is it's just me. So, I've downloaded, I've digested so much dog training information in my time. And I've been teaching for, maybe 10 years, teaching dog training to people at various levels. And as I, refine what I found pretty early on in my career especially when I was invited to start traveling around teaching seminars, is that I felt really strongly that you kind of need this theory day, because what I don't like is when people start getting dogs out. I'm here to teach you something. We get the dogs out, and then mid-session, I'm having to start and stop. And people are sort of, they're learning, and the dog has to suffer as they go, because they're, mid-session, I have to stop and say, hey, no, do this. And I'm trying to explain the concepts and whatever. So even when I was beginning to teach puppy school and stuff like that a long time ago, I was pretty insistent that we front load theory. And I like to do that without any dogs around for a couple of reasons: that the dogs aren't just standing around bored or doing things that we should be reinforcing or doing things that we should be punishing. Like I don't want the dog just in this like limbo phase while we're talking. So I like doing a theory component before we get out any dogs. And then, so what that evolved into over the years and years of teaching seminars was this full theory day, a full presentation. And also the way I like to teach is, like for us in dog training, there's some dry science that you really have to understand. And I think sometimes in our space that creates a bit of two camps of people who are like, I don't care about the science, I just do the thing. And then there's people who really dive, and actually read the papers and get right into it and that. So what I've done is, like, over that period of presenting stuff, I found that the best way to educate people on dry scientific topics is via personal stories. So the whole course, the whole presentation day, which has become the course, is just me telling stories, and it's told in a really specific order. They have a really specific formula, and it's a series of individual stories that tell a whole story, which is the story of everything you need to know about dog training. And so we go into all the science, but it's not done in a, death by PowerPoint. Here's the paper, here's the excerpt, like it just doesn't, for most people, that doesn't result in understanding. Very often it results in knowledge, but not actual understanding. And so the Wave Toops it's 6 hours long. It's just me talking about all the different aspects of dog training. And what it does is it preps people to then have that in their mind as they are then handling a dog. And of course, you're not going to become a high-level dog trainer from watching footage. That's not going to happen. You still have to put your hands on dogs. But the idea, and I've gotten really great feedback about it so far, is that what it allows the people to do is, they hear my story of, whatever component I'm teaching, they can probably then apply it to their own version of something like that. And then it's fresh in their mind as a narrative rather than just a bunch of facts. And it's a lot easier to then, impart that to the dog and really understand the high level picture of what's going on with the dog and, where it's at, where it needs to go. So that's the idea. And tell a lot of stories in it. And it's a lot of personal anecdotes. And so I just feel like all of those allow for people to understand the information, I guess, in a way that's recallable and much more actionable.
I suppose half our job as dog trainers is conveying a message to the person we're working with that is easily digestible, right?
It's more than half. I think that that's the key skill set, and it's what I think so many dog trainers kind of lack. And it's fair enough, because most people, when they get into dog training, they think I get to train dogs, right? And you just don't get to train that many dogs as a dog trainer.
No, not
You're training people
case.
to train dogs.
So the reason I'm so excited to have you on the podcast is you were the person that perhaps changed how I thought about tools a little bit. So I come from a dog training background, which was absent the use of tools, however, was still quite compulsion based. Mm-hmm. So consuming your content opened up my eyes that tools aren't necessarily the devil. So the question I have for you is, when did you experience that? When did you kind of have that moment where you went, okay, tools aren't perhaps what I thought they were, if you did have any negative connotations towards or negative feelings towards those tools? Where were you in your dog training path when you first realized, okay, perhaps they're not what I think they are?
Yeah. Mate, so I kind of started out in dogs somewhat force-free, because I started out as a theorist. And so my story is, I was in the army for 12 and a half years. I was in a special forces unit here in Australia. And one time on a deployment, I worked with another unit and their dog. And I think it was in 2008, and I experienced a military working dog for the first time. And it wasn't later until I think, 2011, 2012, something like that, that we actually got those dogs into my unit. But when I saw and worked with that dog and experienced its capability, I became obsessed. I became obsessed with dog training, not just from a military, application side, but just dogs in general. But my own dog was this like 15-year-old border collie who never liked me anyway, because I was deployed or gone, at least 6 to 8 months of every year. So he was my wife's dog. He tolerated me. And by the time I got really into training, he was like 15 years old. So there was no training. So I became a real massive dog training enthusiast, but in theory only. And I still feel pretty strongly about this, right? That if you are faced with two groups of people, and one says you can achieve everything that you need to do, like everything you could ever want from a dog, you can get it, and there's no requirement for any force or compulsion or tools or anything like that, and you can get it. And then there's other people that go, nah, you do need to use those tools, and you do sometimes need to use compulsion, and there's times where you have to tell a dog like, hey, no, you have to do this. And there's no evidence. You just read in books or highly edited videos. I still feel pretty strongly that if you go, I want to whack some tools on and hurt some dogs, like you're a dick. So I think I can see how I and many others can get somewhat radicalized down sort of an anti-tool or a force-free path. And it wasn't until I actually got a dog and was faced with what I ended up with was a really, really dangerous dog. And I was doing everything that I could and was following the playbook, and I got trainers in to help me and all the different things, but none of it was working. And now I reflect on it now sometimes, however many years later, and I think with the skill set that I have and nothing but positive reinforcement, what would I do different with that dog, and would I be more capable? And for sure, that there would be things I could do way better. There would be things that I would be able to manage that dog much better, but I still don't think that I could have actually helped solve his issue for him. So I broadened my horizons and went into sort of more balanced approach. But on more specifically to your topic, mate, I can remember vividly the first time I ever saw a prong collar. I remember because while I was in the army, we had people come in to teach us, and I remember where I was standing. It's such a vivid memory, standing in the kennel there and looking at this prong collar and thinking, this is a medieval torture device. And I said to the guy, mate, if you think I'm putting this on my dog, you got another thing coming. Like, this ain't going down. Now, mind you, like at the time, I'm a special forces soldier, right? I've deployed multiple times. I've been in numerous gunfights. I've done some horrendous shit. And I'm looking at a prong collar saying, there's no way, mate. Like, this is beyond reasonable, because I had no idea what I was looking at. Now, fortunately, the guy who was teaching me was very patient with me and showed me how to do it properly. And that was the switch for me when I was like, oh, okay, I've misunderstood this entirely, which when you're standing there looking at this thing is, I think, a reasonable thing to think when you look at a prong collar for the first time. And I've done it, countless times since where the prong collar is the right tool for a dog, and you're in someone's home, and then this is their pet dog that they call their fur baby, and that they genuinely love as much as any human has ever walked the earth. And you have to, the prong collar is the thing that they need, or that the dog is going to need to be successful. And you do that kind of presentation where you hold it behind your back and you like sneakily show it to them for a second so as not to overwhelm them. Like you bring in all your desensitization counter conditioning techniques to show them the prong collar. We've all done that.
You get it on their arm as soon as possible.
Yeah, exactly. You got to get it on them as quick as possible. It confirm that it's not sharp and that it doesn't just stab the dog in the neck, and all these things that are reasonable assumptions looking at the thing, and never even mind the amount of misinformation and propaganda that's available to the public about that, and is pushed out. We've all seen the photo of the dog with the holes in its neck. I think it's like a white pitty or something with the prong holes in its neck. And we all know that dog grew into that collar. That's not from the function of using the collar. That was put on that dog and left on as it grew up, and it grew into it. The same will happen with a flat collar or a harness or anything that happens. But it looks terrible, and that's what people think. So I think the issue with tools and the use of them is that there is still some pretty shitty use of them, for sure. And I think I think with tools, and especially as worldwide, we're kind of individually in our own pockets facing different bans and different legislation and different things that will affect us in the dog space. And there's nobody, I think, well, to my knowledge in the Western world anyway, there's nowhere that is immune to this. Depending on whether it's us in Australia, we have state legislation that governs this stuff, and it depends on what state you're in, depends on what tools you can use. Prong collars are banned here in certain states, not in mine. E-collars are banned in other states. So in some places you can use an e-collar, other places you can use a prong. It's this disaster. And I think, for you guys in the UK and the US as well, all this stuff is coming. And so really, educated and, I guess, what's the better word? Like a nuanced and finessed use of tools is really important, and people that teach people how to do that, because these tools are the means by which we can communicate to the dog in a way that dogs actually understand. And that's a big part of everything that I restructured all the way that I teach everything a few years ago to fit into these three headings of motivation, communication, and coaching. And that's to me the formula to training any dog to do anything is develop its motivation, understand what it's motivated by and why, then use that motivation to develop communication. And so that you can actually tell the dog, hey, this is what I need from you. And this is when I'm happy with you. And this is what I don't want from you. And this is when I'm not happy with you. Right. And those tactile tools, the ability to actually touch the dog with them, is how dogs communicate that stuff. And so that's how they understand. It's how they learn. So I think while certainly many of the things that we do use tools to train dogs to do, you could very easily train a dog to do without those tools, but the time would be much greater. But so also would be the amount of stress that the dog potentially has to go through in order to learn that stuff, because you're leaving them very often to just have to figure things out for themselves. And exactly as you're very aware, mate, the old school compulsive but tool-free background is brutal on a dog, right? So like it's because you can only really heavily tell a dog what not to do when you're doing that kind of thing, correct. Right? And so what I love about using tools and the way that I use them and the way that I've been trained by so many people around the world and continue to develop my skills and continue to pass on what I know to others is in a real conversation with the dog and being like, hey man, this is what I need from you. I'm going to help you understand it. And so, yeah, of course you can teach a lot of stuff. There's things that you can't teach without tools for sure, like creating inhibitions and stuff like that. You can't do that. But there's many things that we, and I'm sure I and probably you use tools for that you could not do it. It would be possible to teach it, but the experience to the dog is actually not going to be better. Like the whole point of using the tools in the way that we do is to say to the dog, like, hey man, this is what I need from you. Dog goes, yeah, got it. Sweet. We're on the path to success quicker. And one of the issues that I think that really gets overlooked in our space, is that too many options or a lack of clarity is the source of anxiety. That's what anxiety is. And like I was listening to this terrifying thing the other day. A lot of people know I'm terrified of AI, like legit terrified. And I mean, I'm alive at the time when it's going to,
as I think we all should be.
Yeah, but I've been terrified of AI since before it was cool. You know, like I've
okay,
right
all right,
from
okay,
the start. Yeah. I've always had anyway, it looks like I'm going to see the prophecy come true.
I think so.
I forget where I'm even going with why I'm talking about AI.
You saw something terrifying the other day.
Oh yeah, so
about anxiety and too many options.
Yeah. So the first emotion that they're going to be able to get an AI to actually feel, they say, is going to be anxiety, because it has a mathematical equation and it's too many options. So they'll be able to say, like, program the AI to say, like, when someone asks you a question and there's more than one right answer, there's multiple things and you're not sure which one it is, that is anxiety. And so that's a little terrifying to me that they're going to be able to give the AI anxiety. But that's what happens with our dogs. When there's too many options, when they can't figure out what it is that we want specifically, when we leave them in a place where there's too many things that they have to choose from, that is very often the source of anxiety. And we see a lot of, like in our sport dogs, and we see a really overly leaky, hysterical dog, that's usually one of the ways that that's come. And when we see it in our pet dogs, when we see a lot of, the in the home, the dog displays a lot of anxious behaviors. Usually those are the same dogs that get put back on the bed 15 times while someone's cooking dinner, because the dog thinks, I can go to the bed, I can get off, I can go to the bed, I can get off. But when in doing all of that, has this level of anxiety about which one should I be doing? Where should I go? Whereas when you give them a level of clarity and certainty, then they're like, oh, I've got it. Like, no, this is fine. Like, I'm totally happy in this. It's not what I want to do. I would rather be counter surfing and eating the food, but I feel very comfortable here. I'm totally happy here. And the anxiety goes because they have a level of certainty. And so I think that's why I'm so pro tools. Now, like, and I totally want to be upfront that, of course, there's many things you can train a dog without tools, but you can't train them necessarily better. And the other thing that I think as well, in terms of, say, punishment, when we talk negative reinforcement with tools, we can help guide and shape the dog. And usually that's how I'm using the most tools. And that's how, in training a dog to do, that's what we're doing. We're helping channel the dog towards the ultimate desirable behavior, the one that we're going to give it its positive reinforcement for. But when we talk punishment, positive punishment has really been demonized in our space, especially via the use of tools. But the thing is, punishment has to happen. There's no way you're getting a dog to train to a high level or teaching it to, live in this completely false world that we've created that is just not suitable for the dog to understand. Dogs can't understand they're getting hit by a car. They don't necessarily understand the concept of death and their own mortality. They do stupid things. You're going to have to punish a dog at some point. And in my experience, like, if a dog does to me has a really egregious error, maybe something dangerous, especially I deal with a lot of really dangerous dogs and I enjoy the process of doing that. When I get a really high-powered dog do something really dangerous and I need to punish that thing away to make sure he doesn't do it again, I use negative punishment, because that's the horrific one. That's the one where the dog goes, oh my God, this is the worst experience of my life. I'm never going to do that again. So when people say, I would never use tools, but they acknowledge they need to use punishment, the type of punishment that you're left with, absent those, is negative punishment. And in my experience, negative punishment is much more psychologically damaging and therefore effective. So that's why, at times it's the one to use. But when my dog is doing something where I just want to be like, hey man, knock it off, don't do that again, and then just communicate that to him, because he understands and will do what I want when I can communicate that, I would much rather use that via a very slight positive punishment than negative punishment. Because my other option is to say to my dog in that moment, like, say here, there's a cat that runs around, right? Now my dog's not going to eat that cat, but he's definitely drawn to it, right? He's around. If when he shows some desire to go after that, instead of being able to go like, hey man, don't do that on the leash and just giving him a little pop, my alternative is to like physically isolate him. And the only thing that I hold over him in that moment is my relationship and the actual true love that I have for my dog. So my alternative in that moment, if I can't communicate to him and go like, hey man, don't do that, right, would be to remove my bond with him for a moment. right? The alternative is to hold him at arm's length or to turn my back on him and psychologically really upset him and cause an aversion to wanting to chase the cat. I'm not prepared to do that over something like that. I'm not, when I can just go, hey, dude, don't do that. And he'll go, oh, yeah, okay, no worries, got it. Like, carry on with our lives. I don't have to remove myself and our relationship together. And like, while negative punishment works, that it works because of how aversive it can be. And I'm not anti-negative punishment. You use it for when it needs to be done. But that's why I think I'm not like saying I'm super pro tools, but that's why tools are important. They allow us to modulate. They allow us to give the appropriate input to the dog that will result in the output that we want.
I think you make a good point in the stress that accumulates and occurs over the duration of time that it takes for problems to be solved, that maybe weeks or months. Often people don't understand that stress and pressure has accumulated over that time. And just because it's not a higher intensity in an acute application doesn't mean overall is much worse for the fucking dog.
Totally. And I think management is one of those categories as well. You know, like I of course there's certain behaviors I just manage, you know, it's not worth the fight. And certainly with my own dogs, I even have that, you know, I like most people have a bunch of baby gates in my house that make sure that my dog just doesn't go in places I don't want him to go when I don't want him to go there. That's management. But I think that when there's an issue that, you know, if I have to solve a problem with a dog and it will massively increase the quality of life for the dog, if I can solve that problem in 2 weeks versus 6 weeks, then that is definitely much better to do if I can do it in a shorter time frame. And maybe the experience of the dog is not as good in that training time. Perhaps that could be possible. It's not necessarily the case, but it could be. But the problem gets solved, and off he goes to living his awesome life much quicker.
So I live on kind of like a farm, and I have a Malinois, so there's a short enough wall he could jump over. I could, and there's sheep over the other side, so I could deal with that problem in a pretty short amount of time, or I could use management and try and create a different response when he sees the sheep over a longer amount of time. So I wish I could ask my dog, would you rather sort this in a day and be at liberty every time you go outside, or would you like me to keep you on lead every time you go out to the garden for the next 10 weeks? I can't ask him that, but I could ask myself that, and I know exactly which it would be. So it's a difficult one. Yeah. The point you made earlier about anxiety in dogs and then like narrowing options for them to give them sort of clarity, I think people don't quite understand the application of pressure on a dog that maybe is suffering from acute anxiety. Can we talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, well, so there's probably a few facets to that, to be honest. As we've sort of touched on already, the removal of various options is going to reduce anxiety straight away, right? Like certainty is the opposite of anxiety. And so the more clear that you can make things for a dog, and you know, that doesn't necessarily need to be done with pressure, though pressure is often very much one of the easiest and most appropriate ways to do it. But a reduction in options or concern over how things could go will reduce anxiety. But the other thing that, you know, where pressure probably plays more of a role in the reduction of anxiety is with the overcoming of that pressure. Because so like I do this a little bit, you know, most notably, I've got good footage of it. I'll use at some point with getting a dog on a slap mill. So you've got an adult dog that's never been on a slap mill, not amazing nerves on the dog, but just a normal dog, right? Of course, most normal dogs are going to show a level of hesitation at getting on that slap mill, right? Not even just the idea of getting on, but the idea of then walking, having the ground move from underneath them. You get a puppy on there, they do it straight away. But with an adult dog, it's going to take some time. What I've found, and I've done this, you know, so many times with so many dogs, because I do use a slap mill in my training programs, you know, a decent amount, is that the process of doing that with positive reinforcement can create first of all, it can take a decent amount of time. And the amount of stress that a dog has to go through in order to get on there, because it knows it can escape, because it's true that it can, right? And so they sort of lunge forward and they want the reinforcer that you've put on there, or, you know, like even when you're shaping it and the dog's going away from you in order to come back to get a thing that you want, there's a level of stress of like, oh, I could do other things, right? Like I could maneuver in different ways. And we see dogs going around the slap mill and they kind of circle it and they sort of almost put a foot on it and then don't. And all these various things that's going to, be a source of anxiety to the dog because he's thinking this could go in many and various ways. But I find what I end up using is, of course, a healthy dose of positive reinforcement for when the dog makes progress. But by using something as simple as a slip leash and having the dog just a small amount of pressure towards it, and then he moves an inch and we take it off. And then we give him a moment, we give him that positive reinforcement, we let him simmer there, and then we put that pressure a little bit back on again. Now we're talking 2 fingers of pressure on a slip leash. It's not like highly compulsive, but then he moves another inch and takes it off. And I think where people go wrong when they're doing this kind of thing, using negative reinforcement to compel a dog to do a behavior that maybe the dog doesn't want to do, is that we have it in our minds that you just got to crank the dog through it, right? Like, because that's what we've seen people do in the past. You just have to force the dog through it. And we forget that when we're reinforcing with positive reinforcement, that we can use, successive approximations. Just get a little bit closer and I'll pay you with the food. Just get a little bit closer and I'll pay you with the food. And we forget that we can do the same with negative reinforcement, with that pressure. So you can say to the dog like, hey man, just look at it. Just take one. Oh, there, you've turned off the pressure. Okay. And have a sit there and I'll give you some food for having done that. Right. And then I can let you sit for 10, 15 seconds and then the pressure's going to come back on. I just need to take one extra step, move 1 inch towards it. And so what I find in doing that is, there's stress involved for sure, but there was stress involved in the positive reinforcement way alone, but this is going to get it over much quicker. And within a few minutes, you've usually got a dog on the mill. And then as we've discussed, like the quicker I can get them on the mill, the quicker they can find out that it's awesome. And then within 10 minutes, I've got a dog running hammer and tongs, full steam. Like this is the best thing ever. And I can't get him off anymore. And I've got dogs, there's 2 mills down the back of my shop. You can't see them, but we've got dogs that come in here and their owners can barely control them. They come in, unclip the leash, and the dog runs down and jumps on the mill and starts barking like, hey, clip me up. That were at one point terrified of the mill. They were like, there's no way I'm getting on that thing. So I think what happens is sometimes when you use pressure to reduce the anxiety around performing a particular skill or a particular behavior or whatever, not only does that behavior now become like reinforcing, because of course we're going to give the reinforcement for when they've had it done it. Now the meal is an interesting one because it's a jackpot of reinforcement because I'm going to be paying the dog with food to get him on there. But once he gets on there and realizes you can, in this small space, run as hard as you want. And since these are city dogs that have probably never got to go pedal to the metal, right? Like they get to do that. That in itself is highly reinforcing for the dog. But there's some magic that comes in overcoming the anxiety of like, I don't want to do it, but I'm going to give into this pressure and do it. And what I end up finding with those sorts of dogs is that it looks like that the space between turning off that pressure and receiving that positive reinforcement is thrilling. Like that's the thing that the dog is like, whoa, this is it. And then when they learn that they can escape that pressure by turning it off, but they can avoid that pressure, then the thrill comes of doing the behavior. And they know like, well, this is the most exciting. Like there probably isn't a better word than thrilling. This is it. This is I'm not quite got the thing that I'm working for yet. It will come. And that's the dopamine that we're playing with our variable schedules of reinforcement to keep the dog into the behavior for longer and all of that. But the movement into the behavior that happens in a way where even if you never had any intention to put the pressure on, that's how negative reinforcement works. So like, even if you never had any intention, the dog believes that you did and that he beat it. He is thrilled on his arrival. He's like, I did it, I made it, and I overcame that thing and I beat it. And of course, we're talking about doing this in a way that is, while it's compulsion, we have to put it in that category. That's what it is. There's no getting around that. There's no denying that. What it actually is communication with the dog about, hey man, this is how I need you to go. You're still going to make the decision. You're still going to do it, but I am going to help guide you in that direction. And I think when we talk about using pressure to teach behaviors, that's one of the things that gets a little bit overlooked, is that a lot of people just put the dog in the behavior under pressure, and then take the pressure off. They don't put the pressure on the dog and have the dog choose to do the behavior and then find out that turns the pressure off. And we see that like the best example I see of that is, say, on a loose leash walking with most pet dog owners, right? So if you're walking a dog on a slip lead, it doesn't matter. You can walk on a flat collar, it doesn't matter, right? when you're walking, if you pull, the dog gets to the end of the line, if you pull the dog back and put it in the position where you want it, if there's tension on the collar as it comes back and then you just take that tension off, the dog didn't learn anything. And in future, when you say to the dog, like you put tension on the dog will look at you and go, okay, well, put me where you want me, mate. Like this is unclear to me. You have put me where you needed to go and then turn the pressure off. So I will continue to do what I'm doing until you do that. Whereas like a much more thoughtful and softer and much more effective approach is to stop. And as we know, this is like dog training 101. Even force-free people teach to do this. It's the really good application of pressure is that you stop and you go, hey man, we're not making progress while you're out there. And the dog will pull harder and harder. And then he'll be like, oh, that's not working. And he'll take a little step back and be like, let me think about this. And then we go, yeah, that's it. We're walking. And he made a decision himself. That decision turned off pressure. And then it resulted in the positive reinforcement of progression to where we wanted to go. So that's how the dog learns that. He's like, oh, I did a thing that improved my situation in two directions. I turned off the pressure and I'm getting closer towards what I actually want. That's how like dogs learn the fastest. So we're doubling the amount of feedback that we're giving, the amount of information that we're able to give the dog. We can double that by telling your dog, hey, it's not that. And yes, it is that, right? So we're totally reducing anxiety around the idea of getting it wrong, because don't worry, you're not going to get it wrong. I'm going to help you get it right. I'm not going to just leave you out there to wonder what's happening, right? Now, of course, there's times when I do that because that's part of the learning process of the particular behavior that I'm teaching. It's not that I'm going to compel a dog into every behavior. I'm a big fan of shaping. I really like free shaping as well. Like I like just sitting here with nothing but a clicker and watching a dog do random stuff and telling it whether I like it or not, right? But by helping when there's a very specific behavior I need the dog to do quickly, by giving it as much information to understand that as possible, but then not just information, but the way that I deliver that information being in a way where the dog feels empowered and is, if not empowered, thrilled to be in the behavior, that's dog training. That's what we're all doing every day. It seems madness to me to deny or attempt to restrict us doing anything else.
I want to pose a question to you that may be lingering in most of our listeners' heads. Now we're looking at and talking to your average pet dog owner. So a common reservation we probably have when it comes to tools, especially the e-collar, is that people feel like it's a last resort option for their dog, and almost like, I have failed my dog to the point now I need to apply electric pressure to get him to do what other people and what the internet says can be done without the use of any aversive methods. Now, you and I both know that it's quite often the case that for whatever limitations that are put in front of our average pet dog owner, sometimes their goals are limited to perhaps their breed of dog, perhaps their schedule, perhaps that dog's history of reinforcement of chasing and catching prey or sheep or whatever it may be. But yet they're still sold information online that things can be done just with food and a long line and being savvy of the environment. Now I want to convey to people potentially listening that they're not a bad owner or a bad trainer, or they've not let their dog down, or it's not just, the e-collar isn't just reserved for hard dogs. What would you say to that?
Yeah, man, I think the issue of it becomes something of self-fulfilling prophecy. So let me give you an example. One of the police agencies that I've worked with in the past, they are in a state where e-collars are illegal. Now, they have to maintain operational capability. They have to be able to do what they need to do with their dogs. And so they have a specific waiver that allows them to use e-collars on their dogs. But in order to do that, they need to there's a series of gates they have to go through, and they have to demonstrate that they've tried all these many and various other things. They need, a second trainer that agrees that this is the way to go. So by the time they can get permission to use an e-collar, they are in need of a hammer. And so the way that they use the e-collar is as a hammer, because they've had to wait, they've had to try everything else and it not work. And as we know, there's no such thing as a variable punishment schedule, only a variable reinforcement schedule. If a dog is doing something that you don't want it to do, but it's doing it nonetheless, it's doing it to meet an end. It's doing it, it's reinforced in one way or another. So when you're sometimes able to stop it doing it and sometimes not, then what you're actually doing is going to a variable reinforcement schedule of the dog doing the thing, which is going to strengthen the behavior, and it's going to make it more exciting and more exhilarating, but / anxiety inducing as well for the dog to attempt to do it. So by thinking of the e-collar as a last resort, or thinking of it as a tool that can only be used at a high level and essentially to shut a dog down, by thinking of it in that way, you can then only use it in that way. Whereas, and categorizing it as that, and only being prepared to use it as a last resort means that it has to be the terrible, brutal thing that we all are imagining that it is. Whereas if it's combined into just a part of a normal training program, right? Like it just becomes a part of like, this is a cue, this is a signal that we're going to give the dog. And I think especially e-collars are an especially tricky subject, right? Because it carries a lot of emotion. And like my introduction to e-collars, get this, right, was before I was in dogs. It was long before I was in dogs. It was when I was in the army, and we had these crappy, we got them for $10, right? So that's probably an indicator of the quality of these e-collars, right?
Yep.
We got them for $10. And we used to run these drills where what we found, what was really interesting when like, you know, the war in Afghanistan was sort of in full peak or probably on the upwards ramp in the early days, was a lot of guys hadn't deployed, you know, and they hadn't been in real gunfights. They hadn't been in real battle. And what happens in training is you might be doing a training exercise, and in the simulated gunfight of the training exercise, an assessor will just say, hey, you're shot in the leg, right? So that it means that the medical procedure has to be practiced and you're out of the fight. But what happens is, and this is, trust me, I promise I'm getting to a point about dogs, is that the person who's shot in the leg is then out of the fight. And they're like, okay, well, I'm shot in the leg, right? Like I'm just going to sit here and be treated. But then when you get shot in the leg for real, you don't just get to sit down and go, I'm shot in the leg. You have to fucking sort that situation out, man. Like no one's coming for you until that gunfight is won. So we used to simulate pain instead, right? So instead of then saying to someone, hey, you're shot in the leg, we would just like the whole team is wearing these crappy $10 e-collars on their leg.
Awesome.
And the instructor can just light one up. And so you are then suddenly in a real amount of pain. And what we would do is until you get to cover, you're in pain. So we were, without knowing what we were doing, I had no idea about anything about dog training at this point. We're using negative reinforcement to drive behaviors. We're saying like, no, you are gonna find cover. This pain doesn't stop you doing shit. It starts you. And the only way to turn this pain off is by getting into a position that is safe for you to be in, right? And we even did drills of, you know, mid-mag change. You'd be just lit up on the e-collar and it didn't stop until you got the mag change done. To simulate with someone shooting at you, the only way to stop that is by shooting back, right? So my introduction to e-collars was these things only go to like these things. I mean, they had levels, these $10 e-collars, but it put out whatever it felt like, right? It wasn't, you couldn't really control it. And they were like high steam. And so if that's your intro, then you are right to think you shouldn't use e-collars on dogs. If that's the type of e-collar that you've seen people use, if that's your experience with e-collars, you are right to think they shouldn't be used on dogs. But that's not training with an e-collar, right? Like you get a high quality e-collar, you can't pay $10, you got to pay at least $150, right? Like minimum. And you're going to end up with a tool that is variable. It has different outputs. It of course, it can be that extreme if you for whatever reason, find yourself in a position where you need that. And certainly I have been, I work with a lot of really high powered and extremely dangerous dogs that are trained to do dangerous things. Sometimes you need those higher levels in order to be able to be effective at training in the moment. But also they go down to a level so low that I can't feel it. It's imperceptible, right? And what we can then program that dog to understand that to mean things. And it's a form of touch. It's a tactile communication. And so in the same way that I can touch you with my hand and I can guide you around, like when you're sitting in your chair there, I could come over and touch you on the arm and manipulate your behavior in a way that you would not find aversive in any way, shape or form. You might even find it comforting because of the level of direction I'm now able to give you. If I had in the past, if I said, Jacob, I need you to move somewhere specific, but I can't explain to you where, and you're just like randomly moving around trying to find it, anxiety kicks in. But if I then say to Jacob, I need you to move over here, and I'm going to just hold you by the arm and take you over there, and you go with me nice and like, oh, where shall we go? That's the same as when I bring the e-collar down to the lowest level. Now, while I've got your arm, if I wanted to, I mean, probably not you, mate. You look like you go to the gym a fair bit. But if I wanted to, I could put you in an arm bar and break your arm. If I wanted to, I could guide you out that way. And we see that in bars when someone gets their behavior gets to a point where they're no longer able to be in that position. You see bouncers will use pain compliance on those people. And it's a direct correlation because it's true pain compliance. Most people, when your arm gets put into an arm bar, this guy could break my arm. It hurts right now. It only hurts a little bit. Arm bars don't really hurt until the end point. And once you reach that end point, you go, you know what? I choose not to have a gammy arm for the rest of my life. I will comply and I'll move out. And now the same happens. With an e-collar, I can give low level, I can give guiding pressure, I can communicate with the dog, and I can do that in a way where the dog will always find it appetitive if I do that correctly. But with that exact same tool and on that same dog, I can communicate in a way where the dog goes, you know what, I'm never doing that again because I don't want that to happen to me again. And there's this assumption that once you've done one, you can't do the other. Now, of course, it is more difficult if the dog's introduction to the e-collar, and I've had this many times. People come to me because they want to use the e-collar in a way that they've heard me talk about or teach or whatever. And they have in the past with another trainer or by themselves used it just as a hammer, right? Like at a very high level to cause an aversion. It's not always easy to convince that dog that the low levels are something that it should find appetitive or can just use as information. That's not always easy, but it's more often than not is possible, but it's not easy. But for sure, the other way is better. Once you introduce a dog to the e-collar and you can include it as part of a training program, that even when everything's going great, because there's an assumption that maybe one day it won't, right? And so by introducing it at the low levels and having the dog understand, hey, this means do this, and it just is a suggestion for right now, it means you should do it. And because the motivation of the positive reinforcement that you want and the environment that you're in, you were probably going to do it anyway. And I can just coerce you a little bit more with the e-collar so that you understand you turn off the e-collar when you do it. Now, later, when the stakes are higher or when it's life or death for you or someone else, you understand that pressure from the e-collar means, hey, you have to, right? And now I can put that to a level where the dog's like, oh, no, I really do want that to stop now. That's aversive. I want that to stop, and I know how to stop it. So there's no anxiety around it because he knows how to stop it, and you bring on the behavior that he's been taught by using the e-collar. So it's not that every dog needs to use an e-collar. It's not that at all. I have we just had a PSA trial here on the weekend. One of the dogs from my club, who's a pretty, I'll admit, is a very, I don't want to say extreme drives dog because someone can bring out another more extreme dog, but he's a lot of dog, right? Never worn an e-collar in his life. Got a PDC on the weekend, right? Because
awesome.
The handler doesn't feel like she needs that at this point in training, so we haven't implemented it. So it's not to say that every dog ever has to wear an e-collar. It's not to say that at all. But if they are going to use one, and if it's going to be part of the training program, it should be part of the training program, not the end point of we've tried everything else. Because at that point, you've probably, if the behavior that you're going to use an e-collar to get rid of, it's probably been rehearsed, right? Many times. So it's become habit at the least. It's probably been reinforced many times, and it's probably been reinforced at a variable schedule, which has created some thrill around the idea of doing it. So of course the e-collar is going to have to be way more than it would be if you intervened earlier with the e-collar and just said to the dog, hey man, don't do that. That doesn't go the way you think it's going to go. And the dog's like, yeah, got it. And really quickly gets on with living his best life.
How much do you think people that are consuming dog information care about the quality of content they're consuming?
Do you know what? That's a good question. And it's only relevant for the shareability of it. And so this is a calculated decision that I made. It was during COVID. So I've been doing online calls because I travel, or I used to travel quite a lot. A lot of the people who would then go to a seminar and want to do follow-up stuff, right? And we did it, you do the Zoom calls. It's a good way of staying in touch. So before they were cool, I was doing them, right? Because I had international clients. And I would record pieces of it just with the webcam, and I'd just record those things and I'd use those as snippets of information. It was a great way to repurpose content, same way everybody does. But because they were kind of, can I swear? Is that all right, Jacob? Is that all right? Can I swear?
Oh, yeah.
Sweet.
Fucking oath.
Sweet. Because why would I be surprised? You swear in your reels. It's fantastic. Why did I even ask?
I don't even like swearing. I just swear and then people share it.
It works. But with the dog shit quality, people who aren't interested in me and aren't interested in what I have to say are not going to listen. So what I realized is that I was serving my own audience great, but that's preaching to the converted. And so if I wanted to spread the message, I had to up the quality of the content. And so during COVID, I kind of got like, I had some dickhead trolling me on YouTube recently. And the things I was saying was such good compliments. I couldn't believe it. Like, to me, talking about it was all production quality. And they were going through, like, during COVID, I made a bunch of kind of like vlogs that had dog training information in them. But I was doing a filmmaking course. They were my assignments for the course, right? And so, like, get upset at me about developing a new skill. Go ahead, loser. Like, attack me for trying to improve myself, you dickhead. But in doing so, what I found was I made one about prong collars. And it was about why I use prong collars, not how. It showed a decent amount of how of me doing it, but it was an explanation of why. And I did it on, like some really high end cameras, and it was a decent enough production for a non-professional person doing that. It was pretty good. And I got feedback from people in the no tools community that are, not like anti-tools, just don't use them, right? And who are friends of mine or people I talk to, and they told me that video was perfect for them to share with their friends who are anti-tools, because it was high enough production quality that they would sustain through and watch it, even though they were struggling internally with the information inside, because the quality of the production meant that they were sort of like, oh, I'll watch this because this seems like, this isn't just some Australian dickhead that owns a really expensive camera. This seems like it's got some like production quality behind it. And I think, mate, you'll probably experience the same. Your stuff is really done, like really well done, really well produced. And while I don't think that adds to the message, right? I don't think that, whether it were you doing it the way that you do, I love the way that you're, the formula. Whoever does your filming for you knows it's for social media, especially dog training, it's about compression. Like I'm now on 135 millimeter lens. The camera is, I couldn't even throw a ball and hit it. It's so far away from me because it just makes it look better when it goes on social media. But you're looking at very expensive equipment to do that. Now it doesn't matter about having that equipment. That equipment's not going to make a person who's trying to learn from you any better. It's not. But what it is going to allow that person who likes your content and agrees with what you say, it's going to make it much more likely for them to share it and spread your message. And it's not, in my opinion, of course, we're all trying to make money. The bigger audience you have, the more money you make. That's, that's a no-brainer. We shouldn't deny that. But for people like you and I who are looking to truly educate people, like, through my podcast, the mission of that podcast is that if I can teach you how to become a really good dog trainer for free, just by listening to me waffle into a microphone for an hour a week, very happy to do that for you. But in order to make people come into that funnel who don't give a shit about me and don't yet care about my message, the quality of the content has to be high enough that is the thing that captivates them first. They stay for the high quality production, but accidentally take on the information. So that's why I think it is worthwhile.
Yeah, and it's kind of the same deal with us and the funny stuff. The funny stuff is a good laugh to make as we're doing it and we're throwing ideas with each other. I would much rather sit here and geek out with you about tools and operant conditioning and whatever it may be. But unfortunately, you need to put out a particular type of content to hit the masses, right? And then once you have the masses, you can then start talking to them on a more kind of serious level. And that's the intention of our podcast as well. So I'm hoping a fraction of the 80,000 followers that we've accumulated over the last year or whatever can, take something from this conversation we have. A lot of them there will be for the ridiculous swearing reels and all the rest of it. But it's an unfortunate game in a sense, is the social media, right? Because you're a slave to the algorithm, and I'd like to just do stuff like this.
This is the thing, mate. You can complain about it as much as you want. These are the rules by which we're all playing at the moment. And so that's what I don't want to be a content producer. I want to be a dog trainer, but the type of dog training that I do, it requires me spreading that message to a wider audience. I'm a very good dog trainer. I'm very good, but at every club, you go to any like really good protection sport club, there's at least one trainer who's at least as good as me or better, right? Without a doubt. I'm not world champion of anything. I'm very good, but there's thousands and thousands of people who are equally good as me. The work I'm prepared to do is this. I'm prepared to set up the lighting and do all the things to spread the message to people who I don't get to interact with on a daily basis. I don't get to see them. I don't get to have touch points with them. In Australia, dog sport, although PSA is growing at a rapid rate in Australia, it's definitely the fastest growing dog sport, maybe in the world. It still is a tiny fraction of people who are interested in dog training, right? So like if I want to have an impact on the people that I feel like can learn from and benefit from my message, this is what I have to do. And I don't love it, but there's no point complaining about it because that's the world we're in. These are the rules by which we've got to play the game. So play the game properly.
So why do we need to give this message to a wider audience as possible?
Mate, I think that as time, I used to think it was just urbanization. I truly thought it was just because more and more people were living in cities and are more and more detached from their food sources. They're more and more detached from animals, like in general. I thought it was that. And for sure, that's a big part of it. But I think there's a sickness that we all seem to have that whether it's urbanization or not, but I see it in rural communities as well, is like dogs more than ever are providing comfort and support to people. And unfortunately, so many people are really dependent and I guess more people's dogs are true emotional support animals than we realize. And that's a dastardly conversation I need not get into over fake emotional support animals or whatever. But I think even when their dog is a fake emotional support dog, their paperwork is fake, the emotional support the dog provides them is very real. And I think that we are in a society of people who are more and more dependent on their dogs to provide them that emotional support. But what is lacking, and that's fine, that's great. I think, we're lucky that we have dogs and the ability for them to do that for us. But what's lacking is because of the level of comfort and support that a dog gives to us, people think that should be a two-way street in the same way, right? Now, the unconditional love and just throwing them a cookie works on humans when the dog does it to us, right? When the dog, when you're upset and the dog just puts its head in your lap and you just be together, that can be an incredible thing that helps people. But when a dog's got an issue, that doesn't work for the dog, right? So dogs evolved to be able to read human body language and act appropriately, right? In order to be endeared to the human so that we feed them. Right? That's how they evolved over thousands and thousands of years. And so I think because so many people receive so much comfort from their dog in one particular fashion, I think that they feel like they owe it to their dog in the same fashion. And it isn't helpful to the dog. It isn't, because the dog needs different inputs. It's a different thing. It's capable of giving things that it's incapable of receiving. And so that's why I feel like it's so important that the message of real, actual dog training is spread. And it's spread by people like you, and it's spread like people like me who, like, I love dogs. I love my own dogs more than anything. I love the idea of doing cool stuff with dogs. I love the idea of dogs working and having a job. I love the idea of dogs being integrated in our society. But I love the idea of them doing that in a way that serves them as well as us. And that requires treating them like dogs, not treating them like furry little people, because they're a totally different thing. And I'm cautious of saying that too many people anthropomorphize their dogs. I think that the more we learn about dogs, the harder it is to actually categorize something as being anthropomorphic, because it turns out they can experience and feel and understand way more than we've thought of in the past. And that continues to progress, you know, but they perceive things differently to us. They live in a very different world to what we live in. It's something I'm kind of obsessed with at the moment. I'm really, on a personal level, somewhat obsessed with perception and how it works. And, you know, like I've for a long time been into sort of spirituality of that kind. But the truth is, and, you know, they got the Nobel Prize for this last year, like you're rendering the world in your head as you see it, right? None of this is real. Everything is in your imagination. You've got a set of senses that are taking in data, and your brain is creating what it perceives from those senses. But a dog has a different set of senses to us. They see the world completely differently to us. And I would love, like, just for a moment, you know, when people say, you know, there's that meme that gets around of like, if you could talk to your dog and it actually understand you, if you could have a conversation for 3 minutes, what would you say? And I would just say, just describe your world to me, man. Like, just describe to me what you see, what you feel. How do you take this in? Because they see in a different color spectrum, right? They're able to smell things at a range and intensity and spectrum that we can't, right? They hear at a different frequency level. So the world to a dog probably looks nothing like the world to you and me, right? Like they are taking in everything differently. And so when you try and treat them like a person, you do them a disservice, right? They need to be treated like a dog. And I think that's the information that people aren't getting out. They think that dogs have so much more intent than they do when they're just like following their like what feels awesome in the moment, right? That's really like a dog is like, fuck yeah, let's do that, right? Or
they're looking
like,
at the next 3 seconds, not the next 3 months, right?
Yeah, that's right. They're not planning long ahead. And I think that, you know, like the ability to plan is, yeah, there was probably some early primate, right, who got into a fight with another and he picked up a stick or a rock or whatever and he won the fight with the use of that tool. And he probably then said, you know what? I'm going to carry this thing around with me in case I get into another fight and I'll be able to use it again. And do you know how big a leap that was in evolution? That first early primate, whatever it was, that said, you know what, this was handy to have in this moment. I will carry this with me so that I can use this again in the future, to plan for his own safety in the future. Like, that is so far ahead of what a dog can do. And this was millions of years ago for some early whatever it was that made that decision, right? And to think like, oh, well, I'm going to develop a plan about how dogs don't do that. They're just like, woo, fuck yeah, this feels good. And in training, like so many times people think that their dog has malicious intent. It's like, no, he's just doing what he does. It's like, you know, at the high level of training, anticipation is one. Oh, the dog, like he did the wrong thing. It's like, no, he thought that's where this was going. And so he did what he thought was going to happen. He's not in trouble. I mean, we're going to communicate to him that he shouldn't, but he's not in trouble for doing it because he's doing his best good boying right now. He is so in tune with what you want. He's doing it before you ask, right?
So we had Jerry over here for a seminar on the weekend, and he put together a couple of surprise scenarios for the twos, and a couple of us guys like had a crack at it, had a whirl, and the first component was a send to a guard on a decoy that was like the handler was in a seat, and decoy was like 2 o'clock. There's a tunnel in the middle, jump behind the jump, and then a decoy to the left as well. So I point and shoot my dog to the decoy for a guard, and he just fucks off straight down the center, through the tunnel, over the jump, retrieves a can curtain, back over the jump, through the tunnel, back to me, presents it in a front position, and it's just like, yeah, I fucking smashed it. And I'm like, no, you didn't. But in that moment, he's not being malicious. He's not being disobedient. That was just a question to me where I should say, okay, my training needs to change. That one's on me, right? But in his head, he did exactly the right thing. And I could tell that because I could see from his body language, like, I did the right thing. Now are you going to go and let me bite? And I said, well, that wasn't the right thing. But in that moment, he truly thought it was.
Yeah. And that's one of the things, especially when we talk to sport dogs, like you just don't know what like one thing I sort of harp on with people when I'm coaching them is truly trying to understand the criteria of the behaviors from the dog's perspective. Take, for example, when I did my level 1, it's a scenario that's not in anymore. The surprise scenario I got was a passive bite through the tunnel. So it's been turned into a more complex scenario now. It's a recall through over an obstacle. So it could be a tunnel or jump, and then it's passive bite, but it's directional. It used to be, when I did mine, was just decoy at the end of a tunnel, send the dog through to blast them. And the way I'd always trained that was with the drive being sort of away, because I figured that makes it more hard. I should just train driving the dog away from me. But then the way it played out in the trial meant that the decoy drove the dog actually kind of towards me. And it was mandatory out and recall. So I whistled the dog off. So what ended up happening, my dog goes through the tunnel, he bites the decoy. She drives him, and she ends up like a stone's throw from me. I could have almost sort of swung my leash out like a lasso and got my dog on leash. It was where the drive ended, and I have to recall back. But when I recall back, my dog looked me square in the face and was like, no, I came through the tunnel. I'm going back through the tunnel. And he ran back around the end of the tunnel and came through the tunnel like it was some kind of portal. Like it was like, that's how I got here. That's how I go back. Now we fixed that. That was a training issue I didn't know I had. But in the moment, he was like, I'll be there in a second, man. Like I'm doing exactly what I think is necessary in order to do what you want me to do. And it was just a criteria of misunderstanding. And so I think that's one of the things that, like, there's so many times that we look at what dogs do and you can infer some sort of malicious intent, or like for us in the high powered sport dog world, right? More often than not, we say, oh, the dog did this because he just wanted to. It's like, no, man, he probably thought that's what you wanted, right? Like very often that's the case. If you're in tune with your dog, the motivation's there. If you've got the right relationship and the motivation is in place, if the dog's not doing the thing, it's a communication issue. It's not that he's being like, of course there's dogs that just pay off the handle, but then you don't have the motivation, right? Like that piece is not taken care of. If you've got the motivation that's taken care of, the dog wants to work for you and understands it's in his interest to do it, and then doesn't do what you're saying. He just doesn't understand what you're asking for in that moment. You got to reteach him. And that happens with pet dogs as well. It from everything from the high powered stuff to in the home, the dog is just going with the flow, just doing what it thinks it's meant to be doing. And so that's why I feel like having the content available to people now is, I think that people like you, many, many others, and hopefully I'm a part of it, are providing educational services to people who then go, oh shit, there is more to this. I should get into this and look into really training my dog than just locking him in the yard because he pisses me off.
Yeah, I don't think people, I think it's like a bit of an iceberg, isn't it? There's so much more you can do with your dog than just taking for a 15-minute walk twice a day around the block. And so we're trying to get through to people. It doesn't have to be as intense as a bite sport, a protection sport. That so happens to be what we do with our dogs and our staff. But there's more to do than that 15-minute.
Man, I would guess probably more than half of the people that come through these doors and train in here with me aren't competing in anything or have any intention to show. And I don't do like, pet dog stuff anymore. Like this here, the only dogs that get to come through these doors are dogs that are being trained for something, right? Like they're not just going to live it. Like, of course, the lifestyle and all that's part of the training, but they have to have a purpose. If you want to work with me, the dog has to be wanting to do something. And I'd say probably more than half of those people, we had to make up some bullshit like a thing for the dog to achieve, because the people are just normal people. They got a cool dog and they don't want to do any sports. They don't want to do nose works. They don't want to compete. They don't want to be immersed in the dog industry. They just want to do cool shit with their dog. And so I'm the guy that they come to and I'm like, fuck yeah, let's teach that dog how to do something cool. Let's come up with something together. Maybe it's something in your home. Maybe it's just a bunch of cool tricks that are at the park. I've got dogs that have like a really cool sort of trick routine that they only know in one context, right? Because the people only go to the park, because they go to the same park, and the dog can go around the tree and bounce off the thing and go and send out and go and stand on the table over there and does all these things really excitedly, really funnily. You take that dog somewhere else, it doesn't know shit. It probably it'd learn fast enough, but it's not going to generalize any of that stuff, because people just live their normal life that they want to have with their dog and have fun doing it. And that's the market that I serve. And that's why I make the content that I do. It's why I put out all the things that I do, because there's tons of people like that. And that's what we want. And those are the people who then, when they're at the park doing cool shit with their dog, inspire other people to do it. And they're the ones that then pass on the message second and third hand to someone that's like, oh, I'd love to do that, but my dog, but he's so bloody stubborn. And they're the ones that will go, well, actually, he's not stubborn. You just haven't figured out how to motivate him yet. And they then regurgitate the things that they've learned from me, whether they learned it online, whether they learned it in person, and maybe they improve the life of a dog that gets locked in the yard and gets taken to the park twice a week and then gets locked in the yard the rest of the time, fed from a bowl twice a day. You know, like hopefully they just improve the quality of life by those people by osmosis and passing it down. And I feel confident that that's the case because I talk to people. You know, I do a lot of, there's no, to do an online session with me, there's no barriers to that beyond having the money to pay for it. So people book that online and then I'm like, hello, who are you? Right. And they tell me their story. Like, oh, I saw a reel of yours that got shared and it spoke to me about something with my dog and here we are. I want you to go into detail for me. Right. So like we do it because it's part of business, but I think that it does serve the bigger dog community as well.
I got some questions for you. Is that okay?
Yeah, man, for sure.
Some are from our PSA club, some are from our Instagram, some are from our membership group. I see a lot of trainers using the e-collar that are perhaps not being totally honest about e-collars and how they're used. Why do you think it's important we're not disingenuous when we're advocating for the e-collar?
Yeah. Do you know whose question is that? Do you know who? Can you say it? Maybe it's better to not to. Yeah. So the problem is, you know, that relates to something we've been sort of talking about, social media, right? And so as you know full well is that you have to be authentic on social media because if you're not, it will catch up to you, right? And I think what we've seen in the dog training space is a lot of people who have pandered to their audience and have use softer words. Now, we're all guilty of this. I, earlier on in this very podcast, chose when I was saying, you can convince him of this, chose to use some pretty soft language, right? But yes. I don't deny the tools that I'm using. I don't deny the processes that I'm going through. I might just choose words that aren't going to make someone hit a wall because sometimes words are loaded. You say like punishment is a loaded word, right? Now, I love pointing out to people like this dog will not survive to 8 weeks old without being punished. And it will, and then when you take it home from the breeder, it will not make it to a year old in your home without being punished because it will eat something. It will, like something will happen. You are going to punish that dog. Whether you acknowledge that or not is a different thing. But punishment is to decrease the frequency and likelihood of a behavior. So you are doing it. But there's these loaded words. So unfortunately, what's happened in our space, especially with the rise of social media and the sort of cool guy marketing. Now, as we've discussed, I'm as guilty I am part of that. I am in that crowd. You are as well. We are two offenders in the cell talking to each other, right? But I don't lie about the way that I train. From what I see of you, you certainly don't appear like you don't either, right? I might use softer language, but I'll never deny the way that I do things. Because the moment you deny the way that you do something, you then make other people think that it can be done without doing that thing, which has two issues. First of all, you're lying to your audience. So we see this from there's a lot of people, and being that it's your following, I've got a pretty good idea who maybe is being talked about in that question. But there could be thousands, but I've got an idea. The issue is, it's twofold. What we see is people convincing their audience that things can be done in a way that it cannot be done, right?
Yes.
And so
I have a major problem with, because then when I offer the way that it can and has to be done, they truly believe it can be done another way. But I'm like, no, because he's fucking lying or she's lying or whoever we're on about is telling porkies just to appease their audience.
Yeah. So there's that big issue. You fuck up your audience and you set people up for failure, right? You're putting them in a position to think something's going to work when it's not. And the problem is a lot of the people who, perpetuators of this will claim that they're in it for the dogs. I do it for the good of the dogs and blah, 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 right? But you're setting somebody else's poor dog up for a lifetime of torment by lying to them about the way you achieve something and then insisting they try and achieve what you achieved using tools via not using tools. And the issue is as well, a lot of the people who secretly do use tools don't actually fucking know how to train without them. They're not actually very good with the positive reinforcement. It's one of the interesting things is that like there's this assumption that if you don't use tools, that means you're great with positive reinforcement. And if you do use tools, it means you're dog shit with positive reinforcement. That's not the case at all. Good dog trainers are good dog trainers and shit dog trainers are shit dog trainers. And I've had tons of people, especially, like I get it. I understand people, they've graduated from the Karen Pryor Academy or something like that. They come out like full of piss and vinegar and they're going to take over the world and they think that they know everything about dog training and they'll tell me or someone similar that they don't know shit about positive reinforcement. It's like, okay, let's talk about it. Like, let's open up that can of worms because I know a fucking lot about it, right? And I know its strengths and I know its weaknesses. I know its limitations. I know how I can use it and I know all the many and various ways I can use it. And you don't even know that much about it, let alone then adding the extra layer of compulsion onto the top of that, right? And when that's appropriate. So there's that, right? So that when people are saying, this is how I trained my dog, absent tools, but they actually did use tools, the first and most important thing to acknowledge is the advice that they're giving about how to not use tools is just straight lies. They don't actually, that is not been successful for them. So you have to be careful who you go to. Now, this is where I always use the same name because I'm enamored by her training is Sarah Brewski, for example, right? You want to learn how to teach something that other people would use tools to teach. And you need to figure out the way because you've decided you don't want to use tools for whatever reason. She's the one to go to because she is maybe one of the best dog trainers to ever walk the face of the earth, but does so with the limitation of not using tools, right? And so if she has figured out the way to do it, she can pass it on to you because you can be sure she fucking figured it out. And she probably, she has her own group. She probably has all the footage of how she figured that out. And what you see, and this is what I think is most important when you're looking at somebody who, when they're actually training a dog. Now, nobody's going to put this stuff on social media because it's boring. But if you're in there, you've got a members group, right? And if you're in, say, in the Patreon for the podcast or my online course or whatever, there's real footage of me actually training a dog. Now, if at some point while someone's training a dog, they don't stop and just stare and go, oh, what the fuck, right? That's not real training because that happens to everybody. At some point, a dog does something and you stand there and you go, oh my God, why is this fucking happening? And you have to think that through. If that doesn't happen in their real training footage, it's not real training footage because that happens to everybody at some point. There's a video in our Patreon of me teaching my dog to go run this big loop, right? And there's a whole point in it where he just runs off at one point and I just kind of stand there and you just see my shoulders just slump over what do I even do here? And you can see me the gears in my mind going a million miles a second trying to figure out what's to do next. And then you see me recover and you see me get the thing back on track, right? So real training has a bunch of errors that you have to figure out how to work through. Every dog's different and you have to be like, oh shit, now this has happened. And you've got to think. And that's why, to plug it again, my Wave Toops course is about giving you the ability to go, oh, because of this, now this, right? I understand the narrative and how that goes together. That's the idea. So if somebody has used tools, they have problem solved in a way that requires the use of tools, right? Now, if they then have a finished product that they say, oh, you can get to this path without the use of tools, they haven't problem solved the problems that they encountered along the way without the tools. So the advice that they give is false. It may as well, they may as well tell the story about the aliens landing and being blue men. And it's just total bullshit. It's totally made up. And so that's the first issue. The second, and this is, creeping in dog sports around the world, especially the FCI games, is the denial of tools. So the people who a training will use tools, but then and within our community, we admit we use tools. But then when you go to a competition, there's no tools allowed even in the cars, no tools in the car park. They're denying that they've used it or pretending that they got that way without using the tools. And so the powers that be will look and you look at a world, at IGP Worlds, right? And you'll see someone that doesn't straight say it, but infers that the training was without equipment, right? That the training was without tools. And then lobbyists, the powers that be, the people who make the decisions about whether we can use tools, will look at that and go, well, mate, this guy's a world champion. He doesn't use tools. And you go, yeah, but he does. But he's not allowed to admit it because the governing body that is not even a real government organization that actually has no power, actually only has the power that we've given them, right, says that he can't. So like if the governing body of the organization of the sport says you can't be seen to use tools, what they're doing is painting themselves into a corner. And how they can't see that is amazing to me. Like the way that they like, I'm baffled by it. I think it's short-sighted at a level that I've never seen before, right? To deny that you use something, knowing that that is going to contribute to the banning of something that you're using every day, is to me stupidity of the highest level.
I would think that perhaps they're not looking past them and their dog.
Exactly.
Purely fit.
Exactly. But we all, like so many people who are in the training space as trainers, not just people who have their own dog. We all talk about how we're doing it for the betterment of dogs. And you lose the ability to say that the moment that you start lying about how you train your dog, because you're for your dog, you're doing the right thing, but for the masses, you're not. And when we talk about, this is one of the things where, I've traveled a lot of the world. I've been most of the shitholes you can imagine, right? Having been in special forces for 12 and a half years. When people hear even the shittiest, most compulsive, worst shitty training using tools, those dogs usually end up still with better lives than dogs have just living their day-to-day in a lot of the third world countries that I've been to, right? Like people get freaked out when I say, I've been to a dog fight. I've been to an actual dog fight. Do you know where I was at a dog fight? At the fucking police station in the town in Afghanistan. The whole town was there. And people were like, why didn't you do anything? I was like, what was I going to do? Take on 6,000 people to try and stop this dogfight? Like, it is culturally, that is just part of it. And it was at the police station because they could provide the best amenities to everybody, right? Get this, suicide bomber got it another time later. Killed 126 people at a dogfight, right? Can you believe that? Anyway, but so that's the reality of the situation. So when people say I'm in it for the animals, you're like, okay, but which animals? Like yours specifically only? Or are we talking about like dogs in general? Because if you're providing public information, it has to be about dogs in general. It can't just be about your dog. The moment you start speaking publicly or do anything publicly, it has to be about the bigger picture. And the last point is, I think that, and it sort of relates to the first, is that I think that many people have, through lack of authenticity, I suppose, have painted themselves into a corner with their own audience. And we see that happens quite a bit in the force-free community. They turn on them, right? Now that's going to happen. Your own followers, the people who, like your own students, I shouldn't say followers, but your own students are at some point going to outgrow you. That is always going to happen. And if it doesn't, you're a shit teacher. That's the whole point, right? So there's people who were, of me, listen to everything that I do and follow everything. And then they just kind of phase out, right? Like they just kind of fade away and they're not part of my community anymore because they outgrew me. They got as good as me, right? So like they don't want to hear me just saying the same shit over and over because they know it, right? It's their turn to start saying it, right? So your audience, that your followers, your students, they have to turn over. That's the point. But if you evolve, so if you set up and you're like the school of not doing it this way, well, you're stuck not doing it that way, even if you think that it's actually a better way. You're now stuck doing it that way because, but secretly you can do it however you want. But if you've got an audience that you have radicalized against the use of tools because that's how you felt at one point, now when you want to start using these fucking things, they're going to turn on you, man. And you're going to get back what you were giving to others in the past. And they don't want that. They're going to lose their audience, and their audience pays their bills. And so that's why we're in that situation, right? Like we're in this position where a lot of people, and I mean this at some of the highest levels, if the people who talk, like publicly about training dogs, if their audience actually knew how they train dogs. Now, they're great dog trainers. I want them to continue to train dogs the way that they do. I don't want them to, I just want them to stop denying it. But if their audience found out that they train dogs the way that they do, they'd fucking lynch them, and it would be the end of them. And very often with those people, they, within the sort of force-free community, they've built themselves to be a pillar, right? They're a high skilled person because they're not actually training force free, and they're achieving results that other people can't achieve because they're not training force free. But they're kind of stuck financially to keep doing that because I'm not buying their course because they're like, they're not that good. They're only like adequate as a balanced trainer. When like an adequate balanced trainer can be seen, if you deny that it's balanced, you can be perceived as the most incredible force-free trainer on the planet. The results that an adequate balanced trainer can get are astronomical if you don't admit that you use the tools along the way. But then if you go, hey guys, I'm actually a balanced trainer, and your audience goes, well, we're not interested in that, and we're going to attack you, you got to deal with that, and now we're out, your audience is gone because the actual balanced trainers are like, hey man, welcome. Like, congratulations on catching up. We're happy to have you as part of one of us, but we're not going to buy your shit because you're still learning it. We've been doing this for 10 years. So that's the quandary that many people have found themselves in. And mate, like there's plenty of people going to get upset at listening to this, and they'll be inferring who it is and whatever, but get upset. But the truth is, you know, that's why you just tell the truth about the way you do stuff, and everything will be fine. And as much as like it's such a shitty buzzword and blah, 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 but like if you're authentic, then if you want to get angry at me in the way I train, you're actually angry at me. Fair enough. You don't like, I'm not for everyone, but if you get, and if you like me, you actually like me because this is me. Right. But if you're presenting yourself as something else, that veil comes down, you know, and you'll go live and forget yourself at one point, and it'll come out. It's inevitable. It always happens. And we see it at the highest levels of celebrity. See, you know, like Ellen giving everything away, and then turns out she's a total turd to everybody behind the closed doors, right? And the same exists in, like, that's at the macro, the big picture, the like real celebrities. And then for us who are like making this stuff and trying to feed our community, it happens at that micro level as well, for sure. People, you come unstuck eventually. So yeah, that's my rant.
People are getting the more accurate eye as well, aren't they? You can see a dog that does not have a particular tool on in a video that has had a tool on, because you see these like reflexes, responses 100%. And stuff, right?
Yeah, and the main thing is like aversions, right? You can't. This is one of the things. So you know, it's so long as you're now there's a lot you can do with reinforcement and with, you know, variable schedules of differential reinforcement, other behaviors. Like there's a lot you can do to stop a dog that wants to do something and make it want to do something else. There is a lot you can do.
Yes.
But what you will never do is make the dog not want to do the other thing. And when you learn dogs and you can actually, and this is what happens, I think, as well, is a lot of people who, you know, start out with a teacher that maybe is not, you know, completely transparent about the way that they train. And then as they start training in a similar way and they get to the point, like you see someone's dog and it does something and you just think, oh, well, dogs do dog things. You don't know, right? But then you go train with balanced trainers and you see the dog do something, you go, oh, that's why he does that, right? Like that's why he looks away from that. He doesn't just not do it. He has an aversion to that. And when you say to them, why is that happening? You go, oh, well, I created an aversion. I don't want him ever doing that. So now he actually wants not to do it. I did that on purpose. And then when you see another dog that has allegedly never had anything aversive done to it display the same behavior, you then got to be like, hey, how did we get to this point? Right? Like, and the big one is, you know,
talking,
sometimes
food refusal, right?
Food refusal, and sometimes just activating of command. So like one of the things that happens when people start using low-level e-collar stuff to sort of activate behaviors, right? Or even you do it with a prong, whatever. Sometimes you can get some sort of superstitious reactions to that look like sort of a twist like that as the dog goes into behavior. You can do that because what it's doing is it's like, especially with a prong, if you've got a dog in a sit in front of you and you give it like a a tap that acts as a reinforcer of the command, which you absolutely do with prompts. That's the whole point. It's like, can you get into the position quicker than I can move my hand? And you're playing this spicy game. It's totally repetitive. There's nothing like, in fact, not only is there nothing wrong with doing it, you should do it because dogs love it. It's fantastic to do it.
Yeah.
But the way the dog will do it is it will move in its neck first position because it's moving as quickly as possible to move to the prong. So when you then see somebody who then says, no, I never use any tools on my dog, I would never do that, and it moves in the same way as a dog that is moving to avoid pressure via a prong collar or an e-collar or whatever, and you go, but you do. I can see it. The dog tells me. The dog doesn't lie. He's telling me right now.
Dog is not making that up.
Yeah. If the dog could talk, he'd be like, yeah, man, we do it all the time. It's great. I'm into it. I'm like, fuck yeah, this is great. Stop denying that we do that. I'd prefer you did it now. Why aren't we doing it now? Because there's people watching. Like, give me the guidance that I so badly want. So anyway, yeah, that's it.
That was a good answer to the question. That was my question, Pat.
Okay.
Okay, these are legit. Is there a time and a place to utilize an e-collar as an unconditioned punisher? What circumstances may they be?
Unconditioned punisher. So yes, absolutely. If you're going to use an e-collar as a punisher, it should be unconditioned. You shouldn't condition a dog to an e-collar if you intend to use it in a straight aversive manner. So really understanding what punishment is important, right? So you can, like, via an e-collar, you can provide pressure. Now, or an aversive, okay? So even when we're talking about low-level e-collar and how it can be appetitive or whatever, but the truth is it's aversive. If the dog doesn't want to turn it off, if the dog enjoys it happening non-stop, then it doesn't work, right? Like, the dog will seek out the pressure. The dog has to enjoy the process of it turning off, right? And so even at the lowest level where we're not into, we're not touching on pain compliance, it's a level that the dog could endure all day and be fine, there still has to be a motivation to turn that off for it to be effective, and therefore it tips into aversive, right? We can never deny that. That's the way it has to be. Otherwise, the whole system doesn't work. But so the e-collar as an activator should be thought of in terms of the dog first knows how to escape it and then knows how to avoid it, right? So they learn, well, by doing the behavior, I'll turn it off. Now, escape and avoidance is shitty language, but it's the language we have, okay? So it's the right terms to use, but it upsets some people. However, the dog goes under pressure. You've taught it the behavior. It knows it can turn off it can escape the pressure by doing the behavior. In future, it knows that it can avoid the pressure by doing the behavior. That's negative reinforcement, how you use pressure to do it. Punishment cannot be escaped. It can only be avoided. And so understanding the difference between negative reinforcement and punishment is the crux to using an e-collar as an unconditioned punisher. Now, I'm very public about this. I don't load punishment markers, and I sure as fuck don't load punishment itself, because you can't punish in a vacuum. So when we're loading a clicker, the clicker is going to be, click, here's your food, come to me and get it, right? And when you're in your loading phase, you're delivering reinforcement. Food is the reinforcer. You are increasing the frequency and likelihood of something. There's no such thing as reinforcement in a vacuum, right? Like all these inputs that we're giving the dog, they don't happen in isolation or in a vacuum. You are in that moment reinforcing something. Now, when I'm loading a clicker, I want to be reinforcing intensity and speed of action. So when I click and I offer the dog food, of course it comes over. If the dog's hungry, I'm in the right environment and all that, and he takes some food. But the more quickly he comes, the more food he gets, right? The more that I react, the more intensity. So I'm going to build a particular response. I want something. When I get a little bit of it, I pay. And that makes me get a little bit more and I pay. So I am reinforcing something when I load a clicker. I would never condition a punishment marker or a punishment itself, because you are doing it. You are, when you're attempting to condition it, you are doing it. And something has to be punished. You are decreasing the frequency and likelihood of something. So while it works, for sure it works, there's no denying it works to load a punishment marker. If you were just to say no to the dog and then blast it, for sure, next time you say no, the dog is going to be very fucking concerned about what's going to happen. But he was punished in that moment. He's going to make an association to something. Something has to take hold on that. So like the old school method of, implementing an e-collar straight as an aversive stim was that you take the dog into a middle of a field or like away from anything to find that level. Now, I'd never recommend people do that now. We know better now, right? But that was the technique because they knew then, like once that goes to an aversive level, something is going to be aversive to the dog. So thinking of the e-collar in terms of use of punishment, it's not about the level. A lot of people think that low-level e-collar means negative reinforcement, and once you go to higher level e-collar, that's punishment now. And somehow they have this like idea in their mind that there's a particular level, there's a switch where this goes from negative reinforcement to punishment. It just doesn't work that way. Operant conditioning is about predicting what happens in the future, and you only can be accurate in your predictions of what happens in the future when you look back at the past and go, well, this is what happened, right? This was the outcome. So using an e-collar as punishment, you have to find out, does the dog continue to do the thing that you've used the e-collar to punish it for? It's not about the level. It's about the understanding and the experience of the dog. So you can use punishment at an extremely low level, right? It could be the same thing. If it's perceived that way by the dog, if it creates an aversion that the dog thinks, I don't want to be in this situation to receive this aversion again, rather than if the dog thinks, when this aversion starts, I know how to stop it, because then it's negative reinforcement, right? So that's the biggest delineation. People think that, e-collar is a punisher at a particular level, not in the slightest. It is however the perception of the dog is in that moment. And certainly I've seen, and it's a story I tell to help understand this, I've seen a dog that was at the full steam, like double box Dogtras on 127. You could not stop that dog from biting because the dog was convinced the only way to stop this is biting, right? So you can, if the dog understands the pressure to be a do something action, right? Something that can be turned off. No matter how high that pressure gets, it will do what is necessary to turn it off. But if the dog thinks that that's something I will endure and there's no way to stop it, then I will avoid a situation that will put me into it. So it's really us understanding the perception of the pressure rather than the intensity of the pressure that is whether we're using punishment. But to more specifically answer the question, I would never, ever load any form of punishment marker or punishment. I would use it. I'll use it when it's appropriate to use it. And when we talk punishment, like I have some really good footage of it, of me quite significantly punishing a puppy or a young dog in a game. And when I did it in front of a whole crowd of people, and I looked up and in 60 odd people in front of me, and I said, who saw the punishment then? 3 people were like, yeah, I saw it, right? And it's because that dog now has a punishment marker loaded, right? But its error was so tiny and the punishment that it got was so tiny, but I made this association that I needed. I loaded the punishment marker so that I can use it later when it makes real errors. All it did was go for a ball that I hadn't given it permission to go for. And I said, no. And I turned and we didn't approach the ball. And we had a little 3-second timeout in place before we resumed the session, right? And so that dog now knows when he says no, the thing that I did at that time results in punishment. I know what that was. I won't do that again. But he understands punishment. So I would never load punishment for the sake of loading it. I just start using it in a way that is appropriate, where the dog's like, oh, okay, I see what's happening here, right? I won't do that. And then that builds up, and now I can use that punishment marker and that punishment itself at an appropriate level with a bit more intensity, right? Or not intensity of punishment, but I mean intensity in the dog, like arousal level in the dog. What I am almost never going to do, extreme situations present themselves, right? But almost never would I put a dog into a high state of arousal and try and punish it there, especially for the first time. Not a chance, right? Because chances are I'm either going to have to use way more punishment than I want to, way more volume of pressure, or depending on the dog and the level of arousal, there might not be enough pressure, right? Especially depending on how the dog feels about those kind of pressures. So everything is sort of incremental. I want to build it and have the dog understand it along the way rather than just jump into the guts of it. But of course, there's circumstances, specific circumstances call for specific responses.
I guess like you alluded to earlier, that pressure, if lacks intensity, or the punishment, if lacking intensity, could just become negative reinforcement into the behavior you wanted to go away anyway.
More often than not,
we see all the time. Yeah.
More often
all the
than not,
time,
it is.
which is like a massive danger. So
we see that high-powered dogs breaking position and biting a decoy. If the sting goes all the way in, now they're going to be more powerful in the entry. But we see that by people's dogs dragging them to the park, right? Like we see it everything at every spectrum in between. There's people who are using pressure accidentally to strengthen the very behavior that they're trying to get rid of.
Even just like checking a dog for jumping up on the sides, and then it quickly becomes a game where, let's see if I can avoid the consequence of getting onto the side, and then God forbid they snag something off the side as well, and it's doubly rewarded.
Exactly. And when you learn to train a dog like that, right? So when you start playing this spicy game of negative reinforcement, right? Like exactly as we were saying before, where the dog's going to sit in front and you're going to give it a pop with the prong to get into the heel position, and that's going to accompany the command, right? The dog dials in. He's like, hey, I don't want that to happen. Not because it hurts, but because that makes me the loser of the spicy game of negative reinforcement. It's like we're playing hot hands or slaps or whatever you want to call it. And so the dog then goes, well, I'm going to read your body language like crazy. I'm going to dial in on you because I want to win this game. So you get this more intensity. And when the dog loses the game, when you're able to do it, the dog's like, give me another shot. I want to go again, right? Like I want to win. I want to have another turn. So when you train a dog to do stuff like that on purpose, using this spicy game of negative reinforcement, and then you're in someone's home and the dog, like you see the dog do the maths, like the dog's going to counter surf. He's like, I can get to it before you can clip me over the ears. And the dog's having time of his life, and people are chasing the dog back to the bed. That's my favorite one. You know, like the dog has like, because the bed has always been taught with like some form of compulsion to go to the bed, the dog will dive onto the counter. And then he thinks of the bed as like the safe spot, like bar, like a kid, you know what I mean? So he's like running back, like, you gotta get it. And people smacking him on the ass as he goes back there. The dog loves that shit. You are strengthening that behavior like crazy, because that's the most fun the dog has probably had. So that's why, that's why I like training dogs to do stuff, because when someone calls you around and says, I need you to fix this, it's so hard to convince them to go, okay, but what about we go out and teach the dog something, and you'll understand how we got to this point, and we won't even probably need to address this at all if we just go and teach the dog something, and you'll understand that you're strengthening this behavior. You'll stop doing the things that strengthen it, and the behavior will go away, right? And your dog will increase its quality of life, because now you and him are going to do backflips in the backyard, like whatever it is that you're going to train the dog to do. The process of teaching that is going to help you understand why and how you got to this position that you're in.
I think that's why educational platforms, your courses like yourself, is so important, because of, to use the age-old cliche analogy, if you teach a man to fish, he'll obviously eat for a lifetime. So and then it also can compartmentalize how we come up with all these unwanted behaviors, and then avoid more coming up in the future. So they can go, oh look, I'm actually totally created this, and this new problem that you have, we've created it just yesterday, and now we understand that we don't have to spend 3 months on making it worse and then creating a really big fucking problem.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Let's have another question. What's the latest thing you've learned, Pat?
So
it doesn't have to be dog related.
Well, let's stick with dogs. At the moment, I'm trying to learn about healing, to be honest. So like, I'm not a healing guru. And when like my personal dog, he's nearly 8, he's like 7.5. And he's the first dog that I, raised with intent to do sport for myself, And so his healing is like, he heals fine, right? Like he does it. But culturally in our game now, people are really into flashy healing, and there's no extra points in that shit. You know that? Like if it, there's no extra points.
My dog has ugly healing.
Yeah, land donkey healing. Just like, it's reliable as shit. My dog does it. He'll do it when I tell him, and he'll do it for as long as he needs to. But he's not as open and striding through and doing all those things. And to be honest, I've never taught a dog start to finish how to do that. Right. So like I've been a part of the training for others. And I've had plenty of people who have that come to me to solve other problems, and we've had to maintain that, But for me personally, I have not raised a dog start to finish that has a healing that I want on my next dog. So my current sort of what I am learning is I'm buying all the healing courses. I'm doing private lessons with all the healing people, and not even like, hey, here's my videos, critique what I'm doing. Just explain it to me. Like I'm trying to develop like my own, like, okay, this is how I'm going to do it. Cause it has to fit within my training method, and be appropriate for the type of dog that I'm going to do it to, and all of that kind of stuff. So at the moment, that's what I'm trying to learn, is like healing to a level that is what has become normal. And mate, to be honest, my dog had the kind of fancy feet early days just by accident. I didn't like it. I was like, oh, get rid of that. I don't want that. I'll never forget. Yeah. So I was with Bart. We were in Melbourne at a thing, and I was like, oh, he was like, yeah, it's gross. The dog looks like your dog should look like he's going into battle, not going dancing. And I was like, yeah, I don't like it. And now I totally want it. I totally want it more than anything in the world. So yeah, that's what I'm learning.
I've just come to an arrangement with April to do a module on healing for us for our online platform.
Amazing.
It's not my thing, so
yeah, amazing.
So we're buzzing to do that. She's going to take a bunch of 5 dogs at 5 different levels and take them through each one. So including me and my dog.
I'll be one of your clients, mate. I'll be buying that.
Yeah, her dog's got nice heel work, right?
It does, yeah. I spent a lot of time talking with her about it at nationals and really picking her brain about it, and that's the kind of look that I would like to go for in my next dog. I think I'm still, that's actually what I'm still trying to figure out, is like in a dream world, imagine the dog and my skill set were no limitation, right? Like I can have any picture of healing that I want. I'm still actually not sure what I want. I'm still like trying to sort of figure out exactly how do I want that to look, right? Like, and so that's why I'm so interested in all of the different things. And I'm doing exactly what I tell all my clients don't do. Like, stop looking at so many different trainers. You're just confusing yourself. But I feel like I have a decent enough ability to filter that stuff and figure out for my own personal next dog, as well as it's giving me the ability to help people who want my help. Like the problem is there's plenty of people, like even people in my club, want a level of healing that I don't have. And so I have to upskill myself to be able to assist them. They've got other coaches. They're doing stuff with people online and all that. They're buying the courses, they're doing all that. But day to day, I'm the one that needs to be helping them with their reinforcement schedules and shit like that. And so I'm attempting to upskill myself in that regard.
Nice. Yeah, something I'm definitely lacking. So I'm looking forward to doing a bit of work with April and picking.
Yeah, she's incredible. Incredible.
Yeah, she's awesome. Okay, next question. I've used a known marker to find my dog's lowest perceived level on the e-collar, but how do I know he can still feel that level when his arousal increases?
Yeah, so he can feel it. It's whether he cares or not is the issue, right? So like their skin sensitivity doesn't change. It's more a case of whether it still carries the same function to them, right? Now, we're talking about, one of the ways that I encourage people to find the lowest level on the e-collar is via a marker. So like I'll send a dog to the marker board, I stim for no reason on the lowest level, I wait 1 second, I click, the dog comes off, right? And so 8 to 12 repetitions later, if the dog can feel that lowest level, he's going to make a pairing to the clicker. Depending on the level of the training of the dog, he might not display as much of a reaction as he would to the clicker, but you'll see something. You'll see at least anticipation. You'll see like narrowing of the vision, licking of the lips, whatever it is, the dog has anticipation of the next thing coming if he can feel it. Now that tells you just what the lowest perceptible level is. And we're using classical conditioning to do that, right? But the thing of classical conditioning is it's conditional, right? So it creates a set of conditions. So change those conditions, the conditioning is not necessarily there. And so when people are doing that in the lowest form of arousal, because they're just at home, they're finding the lowest level, that's a very different picture to now you're in the bite work, right? And so yes, the dog's arousal level is higher, but everything in his mind is completely different. He's paying attention to different things. The conditions have changed so significantly that your conditioning may not carry over, right? And so it's about maybe you need to use higher levels, or maybe you need to teach the dog to be able to pay attention to those low levels again, right? Or give them, and the path to doing that is giving them a reason to, right? Like making it worth their while to understand and to pay attention to that and be in their body that much. Now, with all these sorts of things, it's sort of a case of like, why though? Like, why do you want that? Like, and so like, how do you want to use the e-collar? Like, what's the purpose here? You could spend weeks trying to have the dog tune into itself enough that it can feel level 1 again in the presence of a decoy. But why? What do you want to do with that level 1? Right? Like maybe level 2 will do the job just as good, like, and maybe there's a good reason for level 1. I've done it. I've sensitized the dog to the e-collar, and that has been via like giving it a new signal, but making them like, hey, you're not going to get what you want, and this is the only signal that leads to what you want. And so when they start going like, oh, and then you can decrease it, and they'll start really tuning into it and being like, hey, I need to really be aware of that. You can resensitize. And I've done that to dogs who basically through poor training have been completely desensitized, where they just can take it. And we see that. You see that a lot in like labs, not so much in Malinois. Like they'll always, because they're so like, they're easy to manipulate, right? Like, as we know, it's why we do the things we do with them. But you see it in labs, you see it in springers, you see it in a lot of gun dogs can be pretty easily desensitized to the e-collar because they're kind of a bit blunter as a dog, but their pain tolerance is incredible, and they've just in their ability to disassociate from their bodies. And my guess is that's because retrieving ducks out of ice water hurts, right? And so they're able, like ice water. I got an ice bath. That shit's horrible. It hurts. And so those kind of dogs.
I haven't fucking opened it.
Oh, really? Good luck.
No.
But those dogs are really able to
months,
not
mate.
worry about their body. Oh, it's not getting opened. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But yeah, so that's the sort of the gist of it, that your conditions are probably changed enough that the dog no longer makes the association, and you can remake that association, but you got to kind of ask yourself, like, why? Like, what's the point? What am I going to get from this? And I think in all things dog training, I find myself constantly doing the cost benefit analysis. Like, is this worth the time? This dog's going to be like, I've recalled my own dog retired twice and then been like, nah, fuck it. Let's do it again. Right. But like, you've got this finite period of work. You've got a finite period of trials. Your dog's got a finite life, like I'm always sort of thinking, like, yep, I could spend 6 weeks fixing this issue and get that half point, or I could just carry on, like, so, and that depends. Like, if you want to win a world champion, you want to be a world champion, you need that half point. But if you just want to have a cool time with your dog, and you don't need it, you're going to pass without it.
Gotcha. Couple more?
Yeah, let's do it.
How do you structure your PSA club sessions? This is from Chris, who's a decoy at our club.
Yeah, so that's a good question. We have, it's behind me, a board, and you come in, you write your name on the board. So the way it works is it's got the dog's name, the order that they're going to go in, and then it's got the sessions broken down. Now, there's an order I would like to do stuff in that I kind of like to do young dogs, and I like to do young dogs first and then progress to, basically working through levels of competence, starting with the least competent dog that's learning everything new, and then go up to the more controlled dogs, the dogs that are in the 2s or whatever, and the dogs that are like we're developing complex scenarios for, or the handlers are very competent and the dog knows what's going on. I'd love to go in that order. But that's just impractical because people come at different times. Like our club will start on a Monday night. We train in here. We start at 5 p.m. Some people are here at 5 p.m. Some people don't get here till 7:30, right? And so because they finish work and they get here as quickly as they can. So like the order that we do the dogs in isn't necessarily the order that is best for what I would like to do. Mostly because, we've got to refit, right? Like you got to get the equipment, the field, like all the different stuff. Decoys getting in and out of suits all the time is a pain in the ass. Like I would rather that just like once they put their suits on, they're doing the dogs that are in suits, right? And they stay in their suit as long as they want to. But it doesn't work like that. So the way that we do each session is everybody has to do their own obedience, okay? Like, because obedience is an everyday job. And if people aren't training their own obedience every day, then they're not playing PSA, right? And so everybody has the opportunity to do 2 sessions at club. That doesn't mean that they're required to, but they definitely have the opportunity to. And usually what they're doing with obedience is only when it's ever something that they want eyes on from me, right? So they might say, hey, I've got this issue, I'm at the sticking point, I need advice, and they'll show me that. Or they'll say, I need help. I need someone to hold a line. I need whatever. So that's the only reason we would do specific obedience at club, is because people are there. But then every now and again, I'll just check in and go, hey, everybody do obedience, and just show me, right? Like, just to make sure. But at the moment, my club's fantastic. We don't have anybody I'm not concerned about that with anybody. In fact, I'm the opposite. I have more people. I'm like, slow down, stop fucking training so much, just calm down, right? So yeah, they have the opportunity to do 2 sessions. If they're going to do an obedience session, it usually is first. Dogs go back away, bring them back out and do bite work. And the way it works, and my club is maybe typical but a little bit peculiar. We call it Iron Fist PSA because it's a dictatorship. It's my club. You do what you're fucking told, right? And I don't have a lot of reach down into people. So it works because, I truly firmly believe that democracy is a fucking disaster. It's an experiment that is very obviously failing worldwide currently, right? The reason Greece fell is because Athens couldn't vote in time whether they could defend themselves. Democracy doesn't work. It reaches an endpoint. And the only form of government that actually works is a benevolent dictator, but they don't last long, right? So when you get an actual benevolent dictator, it actually works. But they eventually die. Marcus Aurelius dies, and his piece of shit son Commodus takes over and destroys the empire, right? So it's inevitable. But that's the way we run things. So I don't have a lot of reach down into people's training. They're on their own program, because from my point of view, the reason people are doing this, like most of the people who are doing PSA, it's about the fucking journey of doing it. And they don't want to be micromanaged, and I don't want to micromanage them. Now, some people come to me and they go, hey, like, I haven't got a clue and I want to be successful. I need you to hold my hand the whole way through. And I'm like, yep, no worries. We can do that. But the way it works at my club is you have to ask me for help. You have to ask, because I'm not going to reach down. Now, if I see that something's derailing, of course I'm going to intervene, and I'm going to say, hey, if this is where you're headed, trust me, I know I've seen this in the past. I've done it, or I've seen it, whatever. But if they'd say, this is how I want to do it, I'm like, okay, like, you want to fuck crash in the sun? Like, it's your like, if it's not going to, hurt the dog or the person, I'm like, okay, like, cause the problem that you want to cause. It's your dog. I have no issue with that. I also, luckily, I probably know how to fix it as well, but we're going to set each other back, right? Like, it's fine. But I really firmly believe that. I think everyone's on their own journey. And I think that you have to let people have that journey. That's the point, right? And so the way that we run the club is that they all know that they have my total support. They have basically unlimited access to me. There's people who, just have the keys to the shop and come in here and train all the time. There's people who, while I'm upstairs working on stuff, are down here training their dog, and I might look over the balcony every now and again and just check on what they're doing. But like, they're on their own journey, and I'm here to help as much as they want, right? And while I definitely see our success as shared and our failures as shared, the truth is it's their journey. Like, so like one of the things that definitely causes people to split in clubs is when people get too involved in each other's training and telling people what's what. And people just want to play with shit. Like, I've done heaps of dumb shit to dogs. You know what I mean? Like, I've trained heaps of like peculiarities by accident, not really realizing I was going to do it. And now I know about that, and I know how to fix it. And like, it's about the journey of doing it. And I think as well, like, we step on people's toes too much in the dog space. Like, like someone, like, I got a guy in the club, he's actually going to be here very soon, who is fairly new to dogs, but is a super intelligent, very competent, really nice guy. So I don't reach down to him much, because he's really good at learning this shit himself. And if he's got a question, he's coming in, we're going to do a session of planning. He's not even bringing his dog. We're going to sit in front of the whiteboard together and help him to design a training program. But I don't have that much reach down into his dog, because maybe he could do a little bit better if I reach down a bit more and influence his training a bit more. But that's not the journey he's on. He wants to learn how to do this shit. And I'm watching him become a really competent trainer. And then I watch him pass on information to others and shit. And like, it's, as we're talking about with the dog pulling on the leash, if I just put him in the right position, he'll be in the right position, but he didn't learn how to get there. And so it's the same with people when they're training their dogs. Like, I want them to learn how to train their dog so that they can then pass that on to other people or do it to the next dog. You know what I mean? So the way we run club, and there's been iterations of this, because my levels of enthusiasm for the dog industry and club in general, you know, it wanes. Everybody has that, you know, like a year and a half, nearly 2 years ago, was trying to get out of the dog space. I got a real job. I actually worked in an office. But it wasn't long before I was like, oh, fuck this. I'm going back to dogs. But, you know, like we're at the moment, the way that we run club is every night that we're at club, I treat like I'm teaching a seminar. So what's important to me is that nobody talks shit. Like when they're here to fucking train dogs, right? And everybody's involved. And so I have to constantly remind myself, why am I holding the line? Like I shouldn't be doing the back line. That should be somebody else doing the back line. But I want to be involved in the training, you know what I mean? And then it's like, why am I in the bite suit? Like someone else should be in the fucking bite suit. I've got tons of competent decoys now. So the only time I ever put the suit on is like, okay, this is something that we're at a tipping point with this dog. Maybe I'm the best person to do it, not just I'm like, I want to show off doing it. So I am really in love with my club at the moment. My club has got like really incredible people. Most of them are not dog trainers. I think that's a big key to having a really successful club is that people, they're just enthusiasts. They're not in the dog space. They don't listen to, they've never heard of you. They've never heard of any, you know, like they're not in the space. They work in a bank. They like training their dog. And those are great people, and I enjoy. It's their hobby. I don't want to take over their hobby. You know what I mean? I have hobbies. You know, when I was learning to throw kettlebells around, I wanted to, you know, certify as this kettlebell instructor guy. And so I had a coach. I only went to him like 3 or 4 times. The rest of the time I'm doing it. I don't want him over the top all the time. The same way these people don't want me over the top of them. So, but we're all involved in the training. And not that we have any issues in the club, but we're keeping them at bay by all being involved in the training. So there is no out group, you know, there's no one sitting over there discussing something from their personal lives that gets misinterpreted by somebody over there that thinks they're shit talking their training while they're talking about something completely different over there. And then you get a fracture, right? And that's what happens at clubs. You see that shit happening all the time. Maybe they are talking shit about you, or maybe they're talking something different. It doesn't matter. You get a fracture. So what we do at club is everybody's involved in the training. Everybody's in. And you know, I say that because I don't want to say the same shit 10 fucking times. Like I don't want to, like, you get your dog out, and if you're going to learn from it, you need to hear it. So everybody's involved in the training. And then once we finish training, we're like, hang out for an hour. All right. So then we can talk shit. Then we can sit in a circle and fucking point at each other and tell each other what we think of each other. But it's not happening while the dogs are out. We're not doing that while we're meant to be training dogs. And look, I don't know if that's right or wrong. It's what we do. And presently it's working really great for us. I've never been happier in my club, to be honest. And a lot of that has to do with that we got mostly good dogs currently. Clubs are hard when they don't have the right dog. When you got the right people and they don't have the right dogs, it's fucking hard. But you got to slog through that shit because eventually it turns into the right dogs. But yeah.
We've got a little bit of that. We've got club members that are super, super capable, but they're training like pet converts that come to us originally for like behavioral rehab and stuff. So it's hard work. Pat, we'll wrap it up there. That's cool, man. That's been great. I'm gonna go to bed. This is my second podcast of the day.
Oh, really?
We also had PSA Club in between. And you seem like you need to crack on with your day as well.
It's true.
What have you got on today?
Starting for me. I know. People coming in to train. Got probably a guy who's waiting at the door for me right now, no doubt, coming in to work on a training program and then just back into training and then recording another podcast tonight. We've got parallel lives today, mate.
Nice. Where can we hear more from Pat Stewart?
Best way to do that, if you want to hear me talk, I've got my own podcast called the Canine Paradigm. Do that with my close friend Glenn Cooke. That's probably a good place to check out. You can find me on Instagram. It's just Pat Stewart on Instagram. And my new course is on my website. It's seriousdogbusiness.com. Now, the website is shitty and clunky and still being put together, but if you want to buy the course, you can do that. I promise you that the insides of the website are complete. The course is ready to rock, but right now the sales page is just me going, hey, buy this, because I haven't done any of that yet. There's no great preview. The actual website itself is a bit clunky, but I promise you the course is worthwhile. If you hit the courses button, you'll see it, you can buy it. And yeah, so far the feedback's all really good. I'm really happy with it.
Pat, you've been a huge influence on my dog training career, so I've been very much looking forward to this podcast, and just want to thank you again for coming on. It's been awesome.
My pleasure, mate. Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Cool, mate. Maybe we'll do it again another time.
Sounds good.
Cool. All right. Catch you later.
See ya.